Welcome to this lecture on the principles of ecology. Today, we are going to explore three fundamental concepts that dictate the survival and success of every species on Earth: population density, natality, and mortality. Whether we are looking at a tiny patch of grass or an entire ocean, understanding how crowded a space is, how fast new life is born, and how quickly individuals pass away gives us the ultimate picture of an ecosystem's health. Let us dive in and see how these forces shape the natural world. To begin, let us think about population density. Imagine hosting a party. 5 friends in a room feels spacious, but 50 friends in that same room feels overwhelmingly crowded. The total number changed, but more importantly, the number of people relative to the space changed. In ecology, population density measures exactly this: how animals and plants experience their living space. We look at crude density, which is the head count across the total available space, and ecological density, which only counts the truly livable, habitable space. Why does this matter? Because density dictates daily survival. Too high, and individuals starve competing for food. Too low, and they cannot find mates to reproduce. Now that we understand what population density is conceptually, let us look at how we measure it mathematically. The formula is quite straightforward. D equals N divided by A. Conceptually, this is just taking a total head count and spreading it evenly across the living space. Here, D represents the population density, N stands for the total number of individuals in the population we are studying, and A represents the total area, or sometimes volume, that the population occupies. If the number of individuals, N, increases while the area stays the same, the density, D, will increase, meaning the environment is getting more crowded. Conversely, if the area expands but the population stays the same, the density decreases. Before we move on, let us see this formula in action with a concrete example. Suppose an ecologist is studying oak trees in a state park. We are given that the total land area of the park is 50 square kilometers, and there are 10,000 oak trees growing within its boundaries. We want to find the crude population density. We choose our standard density formula because we need to know the concentration of trees per unit area. We substitute 10,000 for N and 50 for A. Dividing 10,000 by 50 gives us our final answer: 20. Physically, this means if you walk through a random 1 square kilometer patch of this park, you should expect to see about 20 oak trees. This formula we just used leads us to a slightly more complex scenario, calculating ecological density in a 3-dimensional space. Imagine a lake with a total volume of 500,000 cubic meters, but the bottom 100,000 cubic meters is a dead zone with no oxygen. There are 800,000 trout in the lake. Because we want ecological density, we cannot use the total volume. We must first subtract the dead zone to find the habitable volume, which is 400,000 cubic meters. Now we divide the 800,000 trout by this livable space. The result is 2. This means there are 2 trout per cubic meter of healthy water, giving us a true picture of their crowded living conditions. Now that we have calculated both types of density, let us look at a visual representation to truly cement the difference. On screen, you see a square landscape divided into 2 halves. The green half on the left is a lush, habitable environment, while the gray half on the right is a barren, unlivable cliff. Notice that all 10 deer are clustered only in the green area. The bracket at the bottom shows crude density, which averages those 10 deer across the entire square, including the empty gray space. But the bracket at the top shows ecological density, which only considers the green space where the deer actually live. This diagram clearly shows why ecological density provides a much more accurate picture of how tightly packed the animals really are. Having understood how populations occupy space, we now turn to how they grow. Think of a population like a bustling car factory. The faster the assembly line runs, the faster the total number of cars increases. In nature, this process of adding brand new individuals is called natality. It is the biological engine of population growth. Ecologists look at maximum natality, which is the theoretical limit of births under absolutely perfect conditions, with unlimited food and no predators. However, the real world is harsh, so we usually measure realized natality, which is the actual number of births that occur under current environmental pressures. Without a healthy rate of natality, a population simply cannot replace the individuals it loses, and it will eventually face extinction. Now that we know what natality is, let us look at how we quantify the raw speed of this growth. This brings us to the absolute natality rate formula. Conceptually, this is just the number of new babies divided by the time it took to produce them. In this equation, the capital letter B represents the absolute natality rate. The symbol delta n, subscript n, stands for the total number of new individuals added to the population through birth. Finally, delta t represents the specific time interval over which these births occurred, like a month or a year. If the number of births increases while the time period stays the same, the absolute natality rate, B, goes up, meaning the population is growing faster. Let us apply this absolute natality formula to a real-world scenario. Imagine a population of wild rabbits living in a meadow. We are told that over the course of exactly 1 year, 50 new baby rabbits are born and survive. We want to calculate the absolute natality rate. We use our formula for B because we need the raw speed of population growth over this specific time frame. We substitute 50 for the new births, delta n subscript n, and 1 for the time interval, delta t. Dividing 50 by 1 is straightforward. Our final answer is 50 births per year. Physically, this number gives us the absolute baseline of how many new lives were created in that meadow annually. While the absolute birth rate is useful, it does not let us fairly compare small and large populations. This leads us to the specific natality rate. Conceptually, this formula takes the total reproductive success and distributes it evenly across every single adult present at the start. The lowercase b represents this specific or per capita natality rate. We calculate it by taking the absolute natality rate, capital B, and dividing it by the initial population size, capital N. If the specific natality B is high, it means each individual is, on average, contributing heavily to the population's growth. If the initial population N is very large, even a high absolute birth rate might result in a low specific natality. Following up on our rabbit meadow, let us now calculate the specific natality rate. We already found that the absolute natality rate is 50 births per year. We also know the initial population size at the start of the spring was 200 rabbits. We choose the specific natality formula to understand the average contribution of a single individual. We substitute 50 for B and 200 for N. Dividing 50 by 200 gives us 0.25. Physically, this means that for every one rabbit that existed at the start of the year, 1/4 of a new rabbit was added. Or, more intuitively, for every 4 adult rabbits, exactly 1 new baby rabbit was born during that year. Just as natality builds a population up, another force constantly pulls it down. Imagine a bucket being filled with water from a faucet, representing natality. But this bucket has a hole in the bottom, constantly leaking water. In nature, this leak is mortality, the loss of individuals from a population due to old age, disease, or predators. We define minimum mortality as the lowest possible death rate in a perfect, danger-free environment. However, the wild is dangerous, so we observe realized mortality, which is the actual death rate. While death seems sad from a human perspective, mortality is a completely natural and essential balancer. Without it, a population would grow exponentially until it consumed every resource on Earth, leading to a catastrophic collapse. To understand how fast a population is declining, we use the absolute mortality rate formula. Conceptually, this calculates the total number of deaths divided by the time it took for them to happen. In this equation, the capital letter M represents the absolute mortality rate. The symbol delta N subscript D represents the total number of individuals that died, and delta T represents the time interval during which these deaths occurred. If the number of deaths increases while the time period remains the same, the mortality rate M will increase, indicating a higher, more rapid loss of life in the population. This metric helps ecologists track the immediate intensity of a die-off. Let us see how this absolute mortality formula works during a harsh winter. A wildlife manager observes a deer herd over a winter season that lasts for 4 months. By spring, 120 deer have died due to starvation and cold. We want to find the absolute mortality rate per month. We use our formula for M to break this long, harsh season down into a trackable monthly average. We substitute 120 for the dead deer and 4 for the months. Dividing 120 by 4 gives us 30. Physically, this means the herd was losing on average 30 deer every single month during the winter. Just like with natality, knowing the total number of deaths is not enough. We need to know the impact on the individual. This brings us to the specific mortality rate. Conceptually, this formula tells us the probability of death for any single individual in the population. The lowercase d represents this specific or per capita mortality rate. We find it by taking the absolute mortality, or total deaths, M, and dividing it by the initial population size, N. This is crucial because losing 100 individuals is a minor event for a massive population, but an absolute disaster for a tiny one. If specific mortality D increases, it means the environment is becoming more hostile. Now, let us calculate the specific mortality rate for that same deer herd to understand the total impact of the winter. We know the total number of deaths over the season was 120. The wildlife manager counted an initial population of 500 deer before the winter started. We used the specific mortality formula to find the fraction of the population that was wiped out. We substitute 120 for M and 500 for N. Dividing 120 by 500 gives us 0.24. Physically, this means that 24% of the population died. For every individual deer alive at the start, there was a 24% probability it would not survive the winter. We have covered a lot of ground today, so let us summarize the most important ideas. First, Population density is the ultimate measure of crowding, helping us understand how animals actually experience their physical habitat. Second, natality acts as the biological engine of growth, constantly adding new life to the population. Finally, mortality acts as the great balancer, removing individuals and preventing catastrophic overpopulation. Together, the delicate balance between natality and mortality dictates whether a species will thrive, decline, or remain stable. You now have a solid understanding of the fundamental forces that shape every population in the natural world. Great job!